Hello and welcome to the next reading for the Filmgoer's Guide to God by Tim Cawkwell. Tonight I shall be covering chapters 8 and 9, and it's the 7th and it's the 1, 2, 5, 6. It's the 7th video, but covering 2 chapters. The first one is, the subject is Pieta or pity, and the second subject is crucifixion. So all in all there is about 15 pages. So we'll look at Pieta or Pieta, and the films discussed are Mouth Agape, Mother and Son, and the Nantes Triptych or whatever. And under Crucifixion, the single film discussed is The Passion of Joan of Arc. So let us begin with Pieta, and from Sir Thomas Browne, who's buried in my home city, from his book Religio Medici, section 36, there is something in us that can be without us and will be after us. So, death in war, like that of the gangsters described in chapter 5, which was violence, which was our 4th video, is usually instant. When depicted in the cinema, it has a shocking, breathless quality, whether it is the casual act of violence with gun or sword that dispatches an enemy, or the extravagant death throes filmed in slow motion so that the victim spins out the moment. Yet a moment it remains. Even on their sick beds, patients dying before the camera merit only a passing mention, even, compared with the living. The narrative waits for no one. The audience is likely to be impatient for the next development. It comes as a shock, therefore, to watch Maurice Pietà's La Gueule Ouverte, Mouth Agape, a film he produced, wrote and directed himself, which gives it a very personal, possibly autobiographical feel. Its narrative is of the simplest. It starts with a woman called Monique being x-rayed for signs of cancer and ends with her death and funeral. It is not clear whether her death takes weeks or months, but we are shown her progressive deterioration from suspect health to her horizontal end, without voice, without response. Because her son Philippe is looking after her, Because her son Philippe is looking after her at the beginning, we think that the film is going to be about the relationship between them, with a role for his wife, Nathalie. But when the doctors tell Philippe that there is nothing more that they can do and ask whether she can be looked after at home, she is taken to her native Auvergne to be cared for by her husband Roger, who runs a clothes shop, La Maison de la Laine. The film then widens into a study of this triangle, how the husband, father, wife, mother, and son respond to each other. Furthermore, it turns out that the film is as much about sex as death. We learn at the very beginning that Roger has been unfaithful to Monique all through his life. I'm using the French term Roger. So much so that his promiscuity has earned him the nickname of the Satyr. Nor, despite his age, does his carnal appetite seem hugely diminished. In any case, it lives on in Philippe, who, while keeping his marriage alive, engages in casual sex with other women. For the wives, Monique and Nathalie, this is the subject of complaint, but they do not allow it to affect the status of their marriage. The family sounds dysfunctional, but one of Pietà's purposes is to show how humans care for each other. Roger and Philippe are exemplary in their attention to Monique, visiting her in hospital, sitting with her as she lies mutely in her sick bed at home, patiently feeding her, listening to her raving as her mind deteriorates, and finally watching her slip away. Another preoccupation is to present life as ritualistic, as if humans live their lives going through the motions, the routines of the hospital, visiting twice a day, picking up a prostitute, serving a customer, watching the patient die. This being a French film, cigarettes are a routine solace, and indeed smoking and sexual intercourse exist on the same plane. It is what you engage in when you want something to fill a gap. Another option in modern society is to turn on the television, but there is a subtle shade given to Roger's character, an echo of older mores. When his son flicks a switch just to watch the news, Roger forbids it, exclaiming, "Have you no respect?" The film climaxes in the singular ritual that happens to those who die in bed at home. We see nurses strip Monique of her nightdress, and then, having gazed at her naked body in which rigor mortis is beginning to freeze her horizontality, we watch with Roger and Philippe as her body is wrapped in a shroud and coffined. The funeral is well attended, for death in a small town is a community affair. It is encompassed in a single shot. The camera tracks forward slowly along the church wall toward a row of sober and impassive spectators. Then coming to the corner, it pans slowly right to reveal Philippe and Nathalie by the hearse in the middle distance, only Nathalie betraying a modest restlessness. Until Monique is buried, statuesque waiting remains part of the ritual. The church is at the margins, to be imagined, if imagined at all, virtually off the screen. Pieta proceeds by hints. Earlier in the film we see through a window, therefore darkly as it were, as Roger talks to the parish priest in ill-fitting cassock, but here only the fag end, appropriate in Roger's case, of the conversation when the priest tells Roger the church is much maligned. A friction is only sketched. Similarly, when the dead Monique is stripped, there is a brief still life of a crucifix lying on the bed, revealed at the end, a secret rather than a public comfort. This quality of observation, inherent in the style of the film, renders the spectator powerless. But into this barren void, Pieta unleashes something ambiguous that can begin to connect us. In showing Roger's devotion to the dying Monique, he invites us to see it almost as automatic. However, when she is coffined, Roger breaks down in a paroxysm of grief, desperate not to let her go. Philippe then embraces his father in compassion, and as spectators we suddenly experience real emotion breaking through. Yet the film ends unresolved. Is this weeping merely another ritual? Right at the end, after the burial, Philippe and Nathalie protest that Roger should not remain in the Maison de la Lanne on his own, because he should not be alone but come with them. Roger is obstinate, insisting he must stay with her, as if her soul is appeased only in company. Philippe and Nathalie, having offered their dutiful comfort, get into the car and drive off. The camera, watching out of the back window, tracks away from the shop, past the church, down the street and then the tree-lined road, leaving the town as if forever. The process of forgetting has already begun. In the final shot, Roger turns out the lights in the shop and the screen goes black. Like music, film is linear. The spectator is taken on a straight line through time, allowed neither to turn back and dwell on a previous scene, nor to skip forward. Mouth Agape has a detachment, but the progression of Monique's disease gives the story a decelerated urgency. In a sequence lasting 7 minutes, her end is recorded. Nothing is said, the only sound is her breathing. Philippe is watching his mother in medium shot. Roger enters, they both watch. Roger leaves and then returns, then leaves. Cut to the exterior of the shop, lit at night, marking a passage of time. Cut to the bedroom. Roger massages Monique's feet, then leaves, while for over 20 seconds the camera lingers on her, wheezing rather than breathing, or breathing as sighing. Cut to Roger in his own room, blowing his nose in anticipation at the paroxysm to come. Paroxysm. Paroxysm. Cut to Philippe in his room reading. Cut to the corridor. The father calls to his son, "C'est fini." It's all over. They come into the room together to look at the dead body. In spite of our impatient world, people continue to die slowly. The film seems to be old-fashioned in asserting this truth. Its tone echoes Ecclesiastes. There is a time to live and a time to die. All is vanity. Creation continues in a revolving world. The life and death of humans is only a small part, and it makes no difference whether you believe God fashioned the world or not. Yet compassion can give meaning. When Roger breaks down and Philippe embraces his father, mouth agape bursts its self-made prison. In Mother and Son, the Russian, Alexander Sokurov, takes this explosion of feeling and uses it to suggest the beauty and abundance of God's creation. The story is even simpler. On the last day of her life, a dying mother is cared for by her son in the depths of the Russian countryside. He carries her outside, they rest in the fields, he carries her back in, he goes for a second walk and returns to find her dead. All this lasts 73 minutes. Its greatness as a film is in the way Sokurov leads us from intensity to intensity. The son's attention to his mother is devotional. Pieta is Italian for mercy and is also used to describe the image of Mary, the mother, cradling the dead Jesus, her son. Sokurov inverts the relationship. The son cradles the mother, so that he might carry her frail, shrunken body through the fields one last time. When they pause at the edge of the field, she sleeps, then wakes and asks him to tell her something. He recites some shared memory and then breaks off. In the ensuing silence, he comments, "God's creation, how beautiful." He is describing the landscape before him, but he is also describing the inner landscape of their relationship. Pietà's mouth agape does not deny God so much as suggest that his presence is unknowable. In Mother and Son, on the other hand, Sokurov, the Russian romantic, sees each action, each word, the whole world as revealing some supernatural beauty, breaking through as revealing the immanence of the divine. Is there some special Russian quality here? This attraction to showing visual surface is a long way from Bergman's version of Protestantism, to take one extreme, but shared with Andrei Tarkovsky, master of the gaze lingering on the world. Sokurov gives the film intensity by the reverence he bestows on two people's actions, but he doubles this by a very bold stylistic effect. The cameraman, Alexei Fyodorov, used painted screens, filters and mirrors to approximate the image to painting, a far step from Maurice Pialat's plain photography. Sokurov has stated that his starting point was a painting of 1810 by Caspar David Friedrich, the monk by the sea, and he sought to recreate in the mood of the film the dramatic atmosphere of paintings like that. As important as giving the film a painterly surface is the use of refracted light to elongate faces and landscapes. Sometimes Mother and Son seem to lean into each other. At other times they lean away. Their features are not distorted but blurred and softened. Sokurov chooses also to shoot on a telephoto lens that reduces the distance between figures and background. All these techniques reduce spatial sense and enhance the image's surface. So often the cinema aims to create reality through illusion. Here Sokurov deliberately creates illusion. There are some 60 shots in the film, giving an average shot length for the whole of over a minute. Such deceleration is strange to us, almost disturbing, yet utterly appropriate to a film about the process of death. The sequences of inaction are punctuated by Friedrich-like images of isolation, including the wind moving in a field of grass and a schooner far at sea working slowly towards the edge of the frame. Most notably, a distant train travels through the fields, the steam from its funnel making a clear white vapour trail tearing the green in half. Although the film is scattered with dialogue and the quality of the images binds the whole together, it is in the soundtrack that creation makes itself most intensely felt. Although we see the train, we more often hear its whistle, like the cry of an upland bird, more heard than seen. Because it is spring, there is also birdsong. In the house, a fly buzzes. We see crows flapping above pines, but it is their cawing that arrests us. Bells are heard. There are dim snatches of music, symphonic and pianistic, reinforcing the film's 19th century quality. Most persistently, thunder, that harbinger of changing weather or season, rumbles through the film from the sky darkened by Fyodorov's filters. Friedrich's paintings of man alone in the landscape before the beauty, or rather the awesomeness of creation, have been realized on film. Only this time the subject pierces the ear as well as the eye. The cinema is revealed as having the potential to enlarge the experience we derive from looking at paintings. We barely identify with the mother and the son, since we are told too little to unravel their personal histories. The film seeks instead to create wonder. The nearest it gets to denouement is at the end, when the son returns to find his mother dead and gives an anguished cry. In a final coup de cinéma, Sokurov uses the image of a just-alive butterfly on her hand to proclaim the fragility of creation, both human and animal. We leave the film with its mood resonating in the head. This is a mental more than an emotional experience, and all the more persistent for that. Mother and son is breaking down the walls within which we watch films. It is marvellous on the large cinema screen. But it is also intensely experienced on video, where the privacy of our watching can be unaffected by any sense of impatience in the audience. It is video technology of a public kind that offers us another type of sight of death. Bill Viola's tape installation of 1992, the Nantes Triptych, is both public and private. Installed in a dark gallery rather than the cinema, it is seen by spectators coming and going as they wish, while the videotape runs things happening in real time, uninterrupted by edits. We can share with Roger and Philippe the act of watching someone die. Viola's Triptych is on 3 screens in conscious homage to Renaissance churches, the frescoes of which are, in his words, a form of installation, a physical, spatial, consuming experience. On the left screen, a young woman is in the final stages of labour, culminating in the birth of her baby. In the middle, a figure moves about underwater, described by Viola as a form of self-portrait, floating in another world with the experience of life and death. 4, on the right-hand side, the tape shows Viola's mother in her final illness. Like Pierlat's Monique and Sokurov's mother, her face is pale and ghostly, marked with suffering, but in her final moments, fully engaging the attention of her son operating the video camera. In this case, our vision is enlarged. Death is balanced by birth. The 2 images do not conflict, but merge into a total experience of the preciousness of life, to which both events are central, not just objectively, but to the subjective individual who links the 2. Joy at watching a child being born and compassion at the sight of an old woman dying are 2 sides of one coin. Both break open our propensity for wonder, and wonder breaks open love. And chapter 9, the subject is crucifixion, and from Georges Bernanos, there isn't a kingdom of the living and a kingdom of the dead. There's a kingdom of God, and we are in it. and the subject of the film is the Passion of Joan of Arc. Mother and son comes close to showing death as the release of the soul, a belief prevalent in medieval times. When her persecutors sent Joan of Arc to be burnt at the stake, they used the cruelest form of execution, since not just the body, but the soul as well was thought to be consumed in the conflagration. When he filmed Le Procès de Jeanne d'Arc, the trial of Joan of Arc, in 1961, Robert-Bresson made a point of ending the film with the image of the stump to which Joan's burnt body had been tied. It is charred and smoking, and suggests her presence beyond the destruction of her corporeal existence. Filming Joan's martyrdom presents a challenge common to all films about the past. If we want to film something set in the 15th century, 600 years ago, how can we know what people wore, how they cut their hair, how much furniture they had, what the surface of walls looked like, what were the fashionable mannerisms of the time? Literature gives us some clues, and there is some visual evidence in pictures and in archaeological remains, yet they remain clues, not full answers. To a filmmaker with a scrupulous notion of what is real, these questions are not negligible ones. The Dane Carl Theodor Dreyer was such a person, with claims on being the most singular film-making talent to have emerged from 20th century cinema. There are several grounds for this, one of which is the way he solved the problem of creating a persuasive historical setting for his films. The challenge involved did not deter him from choosing stories set in the historical past, but he involved a deliberate strategy of simplification, purification as he called it, to create rooms and clothes of some historical verisimilitude that would help the actors settle into their roles, on the grounds that if the actors have a conviction about the spaces in which they move and the clothes they wear, then the audience can be convinced as well. This approach underpins Dreyer's special gift for directing actors and actresses, in particular the latter, since his films often have a female protagonist at their centre. La Passion de Jeanne d'Arc, The Passion of Joan of Arc, which he filmed in 1927, is the only silent film discussed in this book. Unusually, even for its time, it is a true silent. It was very much the practice in the years before the advent of synchronized dialogue around 1927 for films to be accompanied by a keyboard player or an orchestra. Dreyer seems to have conceived his film to be shown without musical accompaniment, and when the film was restored and released again in 1985, based on a rediscovered original negative, it was done without a musical soundtrack. This makes the experience of viewing the film one to which we are quite unaccustomed. Indeed, it is almost revolutionary, for we have no oral element to fall back on that might tide us over the passages where we lose concentration. To make matters harder, Dreyer insists on concentration in his spectator, for he has sought it and achieved it in his actors, especially Mari Falconetti, playing Joan. In 1965, he said in an interview, "With Falconetti it was very often the case that after working all afternoon we had failed to reach exactly what was wanted. We said to ourselves we shall start again tomorrow. The next day we projected the unsatisfactory take of the day before, studied it, probed it, and always concluded by finding in it some small fragments, some hints which reproduced precisely the expression, the tonality we had been looking for. So we started again from there, taking the best and dropping the remainder, using it to start again, and succeeding." Since the film was shot over 6 months, which is a long shooting schedule, Dreyer reveals in this description the immense demands made on Falconetti to reach the result he wanted. So after the sets and costumes were carefully created, after the actors were pushed to their limits, there remained the third key question for Dreyer: what to do with the camera. Again, his strategy was an exceptional one. Where directors use close-ups on faces, they do so sparingly in order to dramatise a particular moment. For Joan of Arc, Dreyer used close-ups as the norm, dispensing with makeup at the same time, as if seeking to penetrate beyond the pores of the skin, beyond the mask of human expression, into the inner nature of his characters. By the end of the film, Falconetti's face has begun to haunt us. Its roundness, the big trembling lips, and above all her large round eyes never blinking. This is a face a portrait painter could make much of, but would have to distill all its character into a single configuration. The cinema brings something new to human representation, the possibility of coming into intimate contact with a person's face in constant metamorphosis. We observe literally face to face all her transient reactions, brought to light by the camera's single-minded gaze. The effect of her ordeal on Joan is given the starkest, most emotional expression possible. Fear is visible from timidity to terror. Shame is visible from confusion to pleading. Resignation is visible from bafflement to acceptance. Joy is visible from illumination to transfiguration. When Joan weeps, as she does frequently in the film, her tears are the most celebrated in the history of film. After she has signed the abjuration her judges desire and has been condemned to life imprisonment, Dreyer shows hair clippings on the floor. He then shows her head being shaved, for a woman, a signal humiliation. Joan weeps. A contemporary account of the filming tells how this scene was filmed in silence. Our sensibilities were stirred as if this badge of infamy was being applied to her in real life. The electricians and the technicians held their breath, and their eyes filled with tears. Falconetti wept for the camera, and at the end Dreyer went gently up to her, collected one of her tears in his fingers and brought it to his lips. The expressivity of Dreyer's close-ups distilled film acting to perfection. The early silent cinema captured a strongly gestural style derived from the theatre of the day, with facial expressions to match. On the eve of the arrival of the sound film, which would change everything, Dreyer arrived at a style that was emotional, but nuanced for the camera only a few feet away, rather than for an audience at the back of a theatre, making the raising of an eyebrow into a violent gesture. The intimacy of the procedure is symbolised by one particular moment. Joan is trapped by her inquisitors into a position near to admitting she has no need of the church. In her confusion as to how to reply, she puts her hand to her mouth in anxiety. We are close enough to see a fly alight on her forehead. She brushes it off lightly, while retaining her look of perplexity, in an unrehearsed gesture showing her inner doubt. The style is in stark contrast to Bresson's version of 34 years later. It is his most static, wordy film, and the camera studiously keeps the figures in the middle distance, close-ups being reserved for the shackles on Joan's feet. Bresson's film is almost a critique of Dreyer's, as if made with a polemical intent, namely to accuse the expressivity in the earlier film of falseness and to deny that the soul of the character is visible through the face of an actress. Instead, it is only revealed through the mechanical style of a non-professional, as miraculously achieved in Pickpocket. Both filmmakers have used the minutes of the trial preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. In fact, Dreyer wanted to make a talking film, but had to abandon the idea because the French studios did not have the necessary equipment. The intertitles, given the blunt questions of Joan's accusers, and her simple replies were important to Dreyer, who wanted them embedded in the surrounding visual material, although they do break up the superlative visual rhythm of the film. Bresson has the advantage of sound technology, but in the end it is surely Dreyer rather than Bresson who has made the masterpiece. Bresson was focused on the legal intricacies of the trial, the verbal battle between accusers and accused. Dreyer was likewise drawn to this, but his finished result is something more, an expression of the ordeal Joan underwent. A woman before men, a young woman before elders, innocence before experience. It is not for nothing that the film is titled The Passion of Joan of Arc, the passion being in dark, bold letters in this book. For if there are any forerunners to Dreyer's work, it is the tradition evolved by Renaissance painting in Northern Europe of depicting the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. He is a victim before ugly and cruel humanity, and his body and face bear the marks of physical and mental torture. Dreyer makes the parallel explicit in the sequence when 3 English soldiers, who set a crown of rope on her head and place an arrow in her hand as a sceptre, laughing and leering as they do so, make a mockery of Joan. She makes no resistance, her distress being signalled by a tear welling from her eye. As we saw in chapter 7, the 6th video, in the subject depression, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th video. As we saw in chapter 7, which was our 6th reading, Rossellini had made use of the symbolism of the bound lamb in Rome open city. Dreyer has the same passage of Isaiah 53 verses 7 to 8 in mind, but uses it literally rather than symbolically. The lamb being prepared for sacrifice is taken in the Christian tradition as a prophecy of the nature and meaning of Christ's passion. The man of sorrows, brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers, is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. Thus Joan undergoes the shearing of the locks from her head without complaint or resistance. However, it is also the case that, unlike, for example, Grunewald's Crucifixion of the early 16th century in the Basel Kunstmuseum, Dreyer eschews the grotesque. Joan was tortured during her trial, and in the film she is brought into the torture chamber to be confronted by the medieval machinery of pain. Dreyer intercuts the spinning of a spiked wheel with Joan's growing terror. She faints. The loss of consciousness is induced not by physical punishment, but the prospect of it. This delicacy preserves Joan's spiritual aura in the film rather than traducing it with physical scars. Joan of Arc has been called Dreyer's avant-garde film, and it can well take its place among the boldest and most enduring products of the flowering of the cinema in the 1920s. Its radicalism, like that of Sokharov's Mother and Son, can be measured in the shot lengths, but whereas Sakharov used only 60 shots, Dreyer, albeit in a longer film, uses some 800 to 850. Towards the end, the pace of the editing, uninterrupted by intertitles and intercutting the burning Joan, the flaming logs, the angry crowd and the violent soldiers, becomes frenetic, like a symphony moving into a higher gear. On the other hand, Dreyer was a classical director who was concerned in his later films with a natural acting style, who ensured his sets exhibited a classical restraint, who, like a theatre dramatist, regarded dramatic structure as a key to the narrative film. Joan of Arc, therefore, observed strong unity of time and place, the trial of 3 months being distilled into a single day. Settings are the courtroom, Joan's cell, the torture chamber, and the cobbled marketplace, all apparently adjacent to one another. A further unity is supplied by the fact that the white walls of the castle rooms, painted pink so that they glowed when filmed in black and white, match the white sky of the final exterior sequence, making the move from inside to outside a seamless one. The 92-minute film can be broken down into sections as follows. 1. Courtroom. Joan before Bishop Cauchon, the presiding judge, and the priests and soldiers, 18 minutes. A judge concludes by telling the English sergeant, "We must resort to subterfuge. 2. Joan's cell. A letter from King Charles is forged, urging Joan to trust one of the priests. He then leads her into a trap during the interrogation. Crucifixion concludes that she is a fiend of Satan and orders torture to be prepared. 16 minutes. 3. In an interlude, Joan is mocked by English soldiers and rescued by a priest appointed to defend her. 4 minutes. 4. The torture chamber. Joan refuses to recant and faints. 7 minutes. 5. Joan's cell. She is bled and the sacrament is prepared, but when Joan refuses to sign the adjuration, it is denied to her. 11 minutes. 6. The marketplace. The trial continues before a crowd of spectators, and Joan finally signs the paper of adjuration. A commotion begins among the crowd in reaction to the sentence of life imprisonment. 10 minutes. 7. Joan's cell. Her head is shaved. She recants her signing of the abjuration. 6 minutes. 8. Joan's cell, then marketplace. Joan is prepared for death with the sacrament of Holy Communion, intercut with continued crowd restlessness. She is led into the marketplace and burnt at the stake. The film ends with the soldiers suppressing a full-scale riot. 20 minutes. The film seems to have been conceived initially as an account of Joan's trial. Pierre Champion, whose edition of the proceedings of the trial of condemnation had been published in 1920-1, is listed as historical advisor, but the result is something much larger, a paradigmatic representation of martyrdom, a revelation of how plain narrative can be transformed into an essential story in our lives. In the Christian tradition, martyrdom is expressed in passive but steadfast opposition to authority in murderous mood. Its essence is the use of powerlessness to bring the bystander to your side, and in the end to overwhelm your enemy. Its weapons are not physical but supernatural. Its inspiration is Christ before his captors. The choice for the martyr is death and glory or compromise and failure. Salvation is in death, not life. For all its realism, Joan of Arc is less a courtroom drama than a celebration of Saint Joan, who had been canonized by the Catholic Church only a few years earlier. We think of martyrdom as something historical, belonging to the early life of the Church, or the struggle between Protestantism and Catholicism during the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. Yet the resonance of Dreher's film in the modern age is enormous, and has only been appreciated in the fullness of time. Among the inspirations for the film is Eisenstein's battleship Potemkin, which had taken European film societies by storm in the mid-1920s. It is the celebrated massacre on the Odessa steppes, the dramatic hinge of Potemkin, which had surely led Dreher to end Joan of Arc not just with her immolation, but with the repression of the riot that accompanies it. The sequence in Potemkin is famous both for Eisenstein's use of montage, building a total effect that far outstrips the sum of the short fragments that make it up, and for its violence. Even after a century of screen bloodshed, this czarist suppression of a peaceful demonstration remains graphic. Its cruelty is distilled in a Marxist version of the Pieta. A proletarian mother carrying her dead son stands screaming before a row of soldiers, the shock troops of the ruling class. In Joan of Arc, the restless crowd are mostly women, and the soldiers are English, wielding spears and spiked metal balls, even firing a cannon into the defenceless crowd. Near the end, a child weeps over its mother lying dead on the cobbles. Just as Eisenstein, in obedience to Marxist-Leninist principles, turns the events of 1905, a failed revolution, into the foundations of the successful one in 1917, so Dreher is proclaiming Joan's death as the triumph of spirit over the grave, of the individual over authority. With the collapse of communism, Eisenstein's myth now feels like a tract, but we are still absorbing Dreher's polemic against intolerance toward the individual conscience, especially as wielded by men against women. 600 years on, the portrayal of villainous religious authority caused the Archbishop of Paris to insist on a censored version before its release in 1928. Its potency is even greater than that. It was not for nothing that the film was banned in occupied Europe during the Second World War. Nor does its currency as a work of art end there. Joan's fiery faith in God is true to the Middle Ages, but it is also a challenge to an age of doubt. We suffer from a loss of self-confidence. We relish the triumph of iconic narrative. We are uncertain of whether we have a purpose on earth. Dreher's portrayal of Joan gives us an uncompromising parable about unalloyed faith, a theme to which he was to return in The Word. And next time, chapter 10 in this book, our 8th video, we look at the subject resurrections, and the films discussed are The Word, Babette's Feast, and Breaking the Waves. And that they begin that chapter with Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 53, for this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So, until next time, God willing, as always, may God bless you all. Amen.